Right, well, I think we've got, I'm pleased to say, it looks like we've got everybody here and with a good connection. I can personally hear all of you very clearly, and you can hear each other okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's a bit of a first, if nothing else. Metin, I said, don't move. Whatever you do, Metin, don't move. Yeah. Suddenly your face just goes a bit blank. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, look, I'm just see if we've got everybody else online. I know everyone else has been having lunch, so it's given the time in India. So let's see if when everyone else is coming back, if we've got everyone there, that's fine. Now I'm going to try. Can I get? Oh. I was just trying to work out how to get everybody to smile. I was going to do a screenshot to get a photograph of us all. So I think, oh no, how's this going to work? This is a bit tricky. I'm going to try and put us on the
Control-Alt format.
Yeah, I've got that. It's just trying to get everybody in the picture. I don't know, because on my screen,
the lips stand out.
At least. Actually, I don't have it. Yeah, how do I get everyone in here? I'll go to gallery view, but
I'll do it.
Can you? Because I've got a couple of blank squares on mine, unfortunately. Yeah, that's how it's showing up. Oh dear, never mind. We'll see how we can get us all. Okay, I've got something that's looked okay. Hopefully that's. Oh dear. All right. No, just not. I've got some blank boxes in there in my screen for some reason. Never mind. We'll go with what we've got, as they say. Now, have we? I guess we'll just wait for Sabura to come on if he wants to do the introductions. If not, we'll just get started, I think.
Harry, what you've prepared is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that.
I just wanted, I had a nasty feeling that technology might not be with us, so I was just hoping to be as prepared as possible. But in fact, amazingly, this is working out so far so good. So I'll keep my fingers crossed it all works out. Hello.
Can I have your attention, please, here? Thank you. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Abhijit Abraham. I'm one of the scholars over here. Then, welcome to the workshop on publishing in top-tier tourism and hospitality journals, held at the Global Hospitality and Tourism Conference, GHTC 2020, in Shillong, India. Before we begin the session, we would like to lay some ground rules for the participants. We request the participants to kindly switch off their mic until advised otherwise. During the initial part of the session, discussion between the editors will be based on the most common queries that we had received well in advance. Participants are requested to raise their questions via the chat window. Also, the participants will be allowed a window for the raised questions to be addressed by the panel towards the end of the session. We hope to have questions that are within the context of the theme of this session. We also hope that participants will remain attentive throughout the session, as well as limit the number of repetitive or similar questions. So, without any further ado, we would like to request Professor Perry Hobson, who is the Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement, Sunway University, Malaysia, to kindly take over the session. Thank you all. Wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you might be in the world. We've got a great panel here of editors who are joining this conference. So we'd like to extend our thanks for the invitation for that, and hope over the next about an hour and 45 minutes to deal with a range of different questions. I think we'll try and make this session as interactive with the discussions based on the questions we've got. And obviously, we're very keen to get additional questions too along the way. So as has been mentioned, my name is Perry Hobson. I'm based at Sunway University in Malaysia, and I've been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Vacation Marketing for about 20 years. And it gives me great pleasure today to chair this panel of editors. In terms of the format, the way we thought to run this panel was by getting each of our editors to briefly introduce themselves. And then what I'm going to do is ask them after that to introduce sort of one hot topic or pressing issue that they see that's been impacting the world of publishing, journals, and tourism hospitality research. Now, following on from that, I've taken the questions that we had submitted and I put them into sort of 4 different rounds of questions. So each of the editors will deal with those. But of course, I know other editors would love to jump in and have got their own thoughts, because believe me, editors have come in many different shapes and sizes, and we've got very different journals, and we face quite different issues as well, given the focus and the type of journal that we've got. So we look forward to receiving those additional questions from you, our audience. Hopefully we've selected questions that address a range of different issues and different levels, because I'm assuming we have quite a mixed audience here today, covering PhD students, early career researchers, right through to those of you who may have a lot of experience and having submitted many papers. So let me start by making a quick observation that over the last 30 years, not only has the world of publishing changed, but with many more journals in hospitality and tourism than ever before. Now, the world of academia has also changed, with considerably more pressure to publish than when I started as a young assistant professor back in 1988 in the States. Now, over the years, we've also seen many more journals being published, particularly in English, and yet many of them are also coming from countries where English is not necessarily the mother tongue or the main language. We've also seen the output of research output from many universities in countries such as South Korea and China that was simply not a feature of academic output over 20, 30 years ago. In fact, I can remember being quite excited when I was the early editor of JVM getting a paper from China. So how things have changed. Now, this change and shift in the landscape is by no means complete, because after all, research and publishing nexus is a complex global one. We don't have time to address all those issues today. Instead, this panel is going to deal with more pragmatic issues, the things for researchers to do as they look to publish their research in top-tier journals. But I'm always mindful of keeping abreast of the bigger picture of what's going on. So now it gives me great pleasure to welcome our esteemed editors, and I'm going to ask each of them in turn to just give a few words about their journal, the focus, aware that not everybody may know about each of the journals that's represented here today. So, I'll start off with if I may, Professor Dimitris Buhalis. Dimitris, it's wonderful to see you here today. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about Tourism Review.
Namaste. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Wonderful to see you all. Tourism Review, which is there, it's the most established journal in tourism. Started in 1946, just after the Second World War. Wow. And now it's 76 years of publications. I didn't start at the journal in 1946. Obviously, there are a lot of colleagues that they've started before me. I took over 2017. And since then, I've been driving the journal to a different kind of level. We became part of the SSCI, and we publish now 80 papers per year. The paper has grown significantly. It's a generic paper, so we take almost any kind of tourism papers. Increasingly, we don't accept hospitality papers because we leave it for hospitality journals, and we are very global on our nature. I cannot help it but mention what takes most of my time right now, which is the Encyclopedia of Tourism Management and Marketing, which I'm editing the final things, and also, I'll bring some expertise from the encyclopedia on the panel as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dimitris, for that. And if you had been the inaugural editor, I would have asked what your secret is, because that would have been quite an achievement to keep your good looks over so many years. So thank you very much for that, Dimitris. Now let's go to Japan. Joseph Chip, Professor Chip, it's wonderful to welcome you joining us from Japan today. And you're the editor-in-chief of Tourism Geographies.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you, everyone. Well, firstly, thanks to Sarah Dixon for the invitation, and greetings to eminent colleagues. So I have to make one slight acknowledgement. I'm the co-editor-in-chief with Dr. Mary Mostafanujad from the University of Hawaii. The journal was actually started by Professor Alan Liu, and most of you will know Alan Liu. It was issue 1 came out in 1999, before the turn of the last century. And the emphasis of the journal is very much on tourism geographies, as you would suspect, but drawing from geographies, especially human geographies. We like to say we are the preeminent journal that publishes papers at the nexus between tourism and geographies, right? No one else does, it's just us. So, but it's a good byline to have. So we publish multidisciplinary works on tourism and related fields such as recreation, leisure studies, and regional traditions from a geographic standpoint. We have a lot of, I would say the vast majority of the work comes from multidisciplinary scholars. So it presents its reasonable set of challenges, but in some ways, like Dimitrios just said, we have to be selective. We can't publish everything, and we have to try and stick to the aims of the journal, right? Because we always say to authors, you know, look at the aims of the journal and make sure that your paper is best fit. So with that, we've also started a kind of offshoot called Tourism Geographic. We've kind of stolen the National Geographic moniker. And basically, the whole idea of Tourism Geographic is to take academic research and write it in a way somewhat like the conversation, so that it's available to a wider range of people, because that's a challenge for all of us as editors. How do we move beyond the academy so that people read our research? So that's about it, Perry. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, that overview of the journal. I always find it very interesting because, as I mentioned, there's so many journals, and in my area, more of the marketing area, I'm quite familiar with those. And as the field grows, it's often you don't fully grasp what's going on in other areas. So I really do appreciate that. Now let's go to Bulgaria, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Stanislav Ivanov, who is the editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Tourism Research. So welcome, Stan, and perhaps you can give us a little bit of an overview of the journal.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great honor to be part of this panel. The European Journal of Tourism Research, in difference to the other journals that are presented in the panel, is a regional journal. So we have a clear European focus. So it is this means that empirical studies within the journal need to have either a European context or at least clearly stated implications for the European tourism industry. The journal is open access. It is a real open access journal, which means that there are no submission fees and all the publications are available free of charge for readers. It is published by Varna University of Management, and it started in 2008. So now it is the 14th year. We usually receive something like 400 submissions per year, and we publish about 40 papers, which means that the acceptance rate is around 10%.
Right.
Otherwise, we are open to any topic related to tourism and hospitality, as long as it fits the scope of the journal, is welcome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Stan. And it's again, if the audience might be able to pick up, it's interesting listening to the history of different journals. Dimitrios there going back to really an industry grouping, I think, that really started tourism review, you know, to publishers, to universities. So journals have often got very different histories, not only from their academic perspective, but also where they've come, you know, how they got established in the first place. So Metin, let me welcome Professor Metin Kozak, who's the editor-in-chief of Anatolia, who is joining us from Turkey today. Metin, hello. You're on mute. Hi there, Metin. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, Perry from Turkey. I'm sorry. Are you able to hear myself? There are some,
Good.
connection problems on my computer.
No, all is good.
Okay. So Anatolia was created in 1990 in Turkey. It was originally in Turkish in the beginning, and we decided to make it more international in 1997. So it became in English. So we have two versions of Anatolia now. One in Turkish, more for domestic scholars in Turkey. And the other one is the English version of Anatolia, which is Anatolia International Journal of Tourism and Hospitality Research. Well, we started with 2 issues in the beginning, but now have 4 issues. And we welcome any kind of submissions on tourism, hospitality, leisure and recreation research. The number of submissions is still increasing, so we have more than 300 submissions last year. And we not only welcome full papers, we also encourage people to submit their book reviews, especially research notes and conference notes and so on. We also published a greater number of portraits of tourism scholars, the leading tourism scholars in the world. So we finished, it was about 80 different, the portraits of 80 different international scholars. And beginning from 2011, we started working with Tyler and Francis Rutledge. So now Rutledge is the owner of this journal in the last 10 years.
Okay. And Metin, if I might just ask, because I've learned something today, I didn't realize there was still a Turkish version of the journal. So they published both versions of that for you?
No. Well, we didn't approach the publisher because, there is a marketing problem. It's more domestic and, so we will just support, publish the Turkish version with our own efforts. Okay. And it is online as well.
Right. Okay, that's interesting because again, this is some of the challenges that we often have as we work across different languages and so forth in different countries. And so that's interesting. Thank you so much, Metin, for that quick overview there. Now let me welcome Professor Dr. Serena Volo from Italy. It's wonderful to see you with the beautiful backdrop of Brunico I can see there in Südtirol, in the northern part of the country. And she joins us as the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Culture, Tourism and Hospitality Research. Welcome, Serena.
Thank you for the kind invitation, and good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. It is a pleasure to be here. A few words about the journal. I took over the journal as editor-in-chief in 2017. The journal was an original idea, I would say, of Professor Archwood's side. It's a 15-year-old journal. It is an emerald journal, and we get as to last year, we get about 300 submissions with an acceptance rate of about 8%. So the journal has increased visibility, and therefore we got a good number of submissions, but we can accommodate a few papers. Therefore, we look for high-quality papers in the field of and consumer behavior in tourism and hospitality. Of the journal is to look into interdisciplinary and multicultural work in sociology, psychology, even geography, and consumer behavior and marketing in tourism and hospitality. The distinguishing feature of the journal is really on the role of culture and how culture shapes tourism and hospitality in our field. So the submissions that we're looking for are in this direction. The type of submission they accept are the full-length papers, the research note papers, and also cut-edge short commentaries on topics that are really contemporary, and maybe they can develop newer streams of research. Yes, that would be it at the moment.
Well, that's fine. Well, thank you, Serena, for that. And it's interesting to hear, the distinctive, because, as you mentioned, many journals have a distinctive feature, and sometimes, as I said, depending how familiar other academics and our colleagues are, how clearly that comes across. And I think that's something as the field gets increasingly crowded with journals, so that people submitting authors understand what the key focus is, and often what editors are looking for to help reinforce that. So last but not least, let me turn to my associate editor and colleague, Dr. Gabby Walters, who's joining us from Brisbane, from the University of Queensland. And as you can see, JVM is a marketing journal, and she wins them, along with Stan is winning, and Dimitris is winning the marketing prizes for having the biggest backdrop as well. So Gabby, welcome. It's great to see you here this evening. Tell us a little bit about JVM.
Thank you, Perry. And you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, being the editor-in-chief. But so JVM started up in 1994, and its initial focus was to be an applied journal that was targeted towards practice, but it's since become more theoretical in focus, but still keeping that applied angle as well. So it's a marketing journal. It's all about destination marketing. It's all about tourist behaviour. So to all those marketers out there and all those people that that play in that area, JVM is a great place for any marketing related research that is relevant to tourism, obviously, and any research that's relevant to tourist behaviour.
Yeah, and as Gabby's pointed out there, it's having that distinctive focus, and JVM in particular looks for applied papers. And again, it's that interesting thing. In fact, the history of the journal was a small publisher, which the journal then moved to a larger publisher, Sage. In the old days, we used to publish papers that were written by practitioners, which we haven't done now for about 10 years. But again, the roots of the journal stretch back to that. So again, a bit of a different history, and as a result of that, a slightly different position. Now, while I've got you on, Gabby, what I've asked each editor to do is to identify one sort of pressing sort of issue that they would like to, briefly talk about, as being their issue of concern that they're seeing, which is happening in our field, particularly with publishing, etc. So, Gabby, you've got some concerns about how people, when they submit papers, make this point about the contribution that they're making in terms of their paper, and the difference between a theoretical contribution and a contribution to knowledge. What do you see as the issue there, or the problem being?
So Perry, I think one of the main issues, and it's not just with the authors, I think it's across journals in particular, in that there are claims made with regards to a contribution to theory that really isn't a contribution to theory. There's a fantastic paper, and if I can somehow share it with the audience after this presentation, it was written by Zur Shapira, and it's called "I've Got a Theory Paper, Do You?" And it's conceptual, empirical and theoretical contributions to knowledge in the organisational sciences, which is and social sciences. And I think we get all caught up because it's a necessity a lot of the time, well, it's perceived to be a necessity to have your paper accepted, that it needs to have a contribution to theory. Not all papers in tourism actually, I would argue that 50% most of papers in tourism make a contribution to theory, but they're passed off as a contribution to theory, which further confuses people, because they're like, well, why isn't my paper? There was a segmentation analysis on visitors going to Greece accepted as a contribution to theory, when another paper about a segmentation study on tourists travelling to Australia was accepted because it said it had a contribution to theory. Segmentation analysis isn't necessarily a contribution to theory, but it can be a great contribution to knowledge. And there is nothing wrong with a contribution to knowledge, because it's all those little pieces of knowledge that come together to make these theories. But theories are, they're big deals. Often, many of us in our entire career won't create or develop a theory. Because theories need to be tested, they need to be refuted, they need to be able to be falsified. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of publication, research and a lot of studies. So if we think about the theory of evolution, what does that tell us? The theory is an explanation as to why things or a proposed explanation as to why things occur and how they occur. Okay, so think about your research in terms of whether you are really making a contribution to theory, or you're contributing to knowledge, and knowledge we need to know. Knowledge that is new and novel, but not necessarily theoretical.
All right, I think that's a really good point.
Clear up, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Gabby, because I think that's a really good point. And I think it's a point which a lot of people, a lot of academics when they're submitting papers get confused on, you know, because people are asked to make a contribution. I know a lot of reviewers give us the question, so what? What does this paper do? And we get often a simple thing back about that. And I think putting that out there is a really important point. So thank you for that. And I'm going to now move quickly on to Stan. Stan, one of your concerns, I think one of the issues we've often raised as editors is the challenge we have of finding enough people to be reviewers. And I know that as Gabby and I have been working with JDM, we've seen a huge increase in the number of papers as more and more pressure seems to be put on academics to publish. But there seems I get the feeling there's more of a reticence of academics to actually review, maybe because they're so busy writing papers, I don't know. But it does seem to me this is an important contribution. So, Stan, what's your concern here, and why do you think it's important for academics to be a reviewer?
Yeah, thank you. This is really a pressing issue because besides our roles as authors, we also want, well, when we want our papers to be reviewed by others, we also need to give back to the community. So it is very important that we also review others' papers. Editors, as you said, often struggle finding appropriate reviewers or at least sufficient number of reviews for the papers. So to have 2-3 reviews of a paper, then editors often need to send invitations to 6, 7, sometimes even 10 or more reviewers. And good reviewers, they are in high demand, which means that it's highly unlikely that they will be able to submit a review. So probably the first and most important reason why it is important to be a reviewer from from the perspective of the community as a whole is to give back to the community. So if you want to publish in a journal, then you should also review them for that journal. Also, being a reviewer helps you see the manuscript through the eyes of the reviewer. So every paper has different, different readers. The first reader, this is obviously the editor, but after that it is the reviewers. So there will be different pairs of eyes that will see the paper before it goes to the final readers of the paper, and that's why it is important to see how readers, how reviewers will read your own manuscripts later. So also being a reviewer helps gain skills in critically evaluating papers. It also learn about latest methodologies or latest research before it gets published, because you will see because reviewers will see the papers several months before that paper is eventually published, if it is published. Also, being a reviewer gives inspiration for one's own research. So seeing what others are doing may help you generate ideas for your own research. And finally, probably because we are all human beings, and we are also concerned about some subjective reasons, like getting appreciation in the research community and build reputation. This is also something that that can be achieved by reviewing papers. So there.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I couldn't agree with. I think I agree absolutely every point you've made. I've said so often to young reviewers and those in the community that it's not only just about giving back. You're actually helping yourself, because by reviewing, you learn those critical skills. You're seeing it through other people's eyes for all those reasons that you mentioned. And I can't obviously speak for JDM, but clearly I don't think a lot of editors are challenged to find enough reviewers. We're getting so many papers coming in, and it is a matter of community. And obviously each of us have got different ways we approach people, but I know I'm very pleased to be approached by people who want to put their hand up and to do more. Now, Metin, this brings us on to a more fundamental issue, pressing issue that you felt you'd like to tackle today, which is quite a fundamental one, which is, why do we really need journals?
Thank you, Perry. Let's say, to find the answer for this question, I think it's better to look at the history of journals. Mm-hmm. When the first journals were created in the 17th century. Okay, the first journals in the world were created in 1665 in London and in Paris. I think the one in London was about the philosophy. Mm-hmm. Okay, the name is Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, and the one in Paris is about something, Journal de Sciences. I think it could be something again about the philosophy. Okay, and before that, people, and mainly those people, thinking or writing about philosophical things, they used to be exchanging ideas or knowledge with each other by writing letters to each other. Okay, then they said, okay, the cumulative amount of knowledge, I think, must be increasing, and they perhaps wanted to control all this knowledge, and then they decide to perhaps the idea can also be more professional, and they decided to publish, the professional or more academic or scientific, edition or version of these journals that we use today. Well, the idea was just to exchange the knowledge. Okay, it seems that the role or the mission of journals now has changed. So they have become more personal or more institutional, but the main idea should be how we can exchange knowledge and how we can find solutions for the, let's say, society or industry or the, let's say, the world, the life. Okay, this is the tricky.
Well, I think it's a really good point. And as you said, going back, and I admire you for doing your history on when journals started, and glad to find out the first one started in England, because obviously that's where I'm from, and that we were able to beat the French. So that's great. Always good history. But it does make a good point. And of course, as technology, obviously journals could only be printed once we got the Gutenberg press, who allowed things to be printed. And so again, technology has taken us along that. And obviously now with open access and the internet, how knowledge is transmitted and these days has changed again. And,
the French Revolution had a big impact on the dissemination of all these journals. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So again, we're at another sort of interesting point too, which, talking about technology and so forth, that takes me over to Dimitris, because one of the issues you'd raised was about smart and ambient, smart and intelligent tourism. So what's your sort of issue, pressing issue you're finding?
Perry, as a bad student, I think I misread the question. So you were asking about publications, and I was thinking about generic issues in tourism. And of course, smart tourism is probably one of the most critical issues right now that we need to look into for restarting tourism internationally. Having said that, I'll kind of make a link back to publications and be a good student and improvise on the last minute of the exam. And what you have is a situation where, all the publications and all the journals kind of way of getting information out, it's a little bit archaic. In fact, it hasn't changed for many, many years. We are sending a paper in, it's admitted in Tourism Review. We are very, very quick, as many people know, because, in 30 days, we're doing reviews, back maximum 35 days. We've gone around in 32 days. It's the average length of reviewing. But I think still we'll have 3 or 4 reviews, which will take a paper about a year to appear. Yeah. And by that time, things have moved forward a lot, especially on issues like COVID. You know, Metin submitted a very nice paper in Tourism Review, and we did very quickly, we published very quickly, and it's very, very useful to a lot of people. I think we kind of need to find out how we can use the journals very efficiently to bring things out quickly, but also use a range of other media as well that they're going next to the journals. So the blogs, the social media, the Twitters, and, you know, increasingly vlogging and videos and all of those things to actually bring content out. And what you see now is a new generation of editors. You know, I keep following Joseph on what he's doing on Facebook and on Twitter and everything else. And we're very active on those things, and we're getting the information out as soon as it happens. So we are much faster than some of the very old journals. And you see, you know, what Sarah is doing with Annals. We are always pushing the content out because we kind of feel that it's a smart way of actually using science, and we're trying to make an impact, not only in terms of how many people are citing our papers and this kind of impact factors and stuff, but also impact to society, because a lot of the stuff that is written is actually never seen. And I think for those people who are following us and they are listening to what we're saying, is that when you are choosing a journal, you really need to choose a journal that's gonna look into your thing, into your research very quickly and efficiently, and do a good job giving you justice, but also make it relevant to industry and bring it out to society as soon as possible, and then use all the other kind of media that we've got to engage with the global society. And something else, now I've got the microphone. Can I just say?
Yes, okay, well, we'll let you have one more, okay?
Yeah. And because I get a lot of papers from India, and colleagues in India, they're just sending me papers that they're really about the village of their mother. This is the village of my mother syndrome, as I call it. So they're very interested on one particular location, and they know everything about this particular location, the papers for that particular location. But I struggle to publish it in Tourism Review as an international journal. And I always goes back and says, guys, what you do, has it got an impact to global society? And that's part of the smartness thing, that can we improve society globally? Thank you, Perry.
No, well, I actually thank you very much for linking it back there to India. And I must say, I think you've recovered your bad student thing with 10 out of 10 there, because I think the link you made there with the way that we're becoming smarter and the way to deliver, because for some papers, and I know I was feeling this, you know, our publication timelines were getting longer and longer, and the information we were publishing was actually getting older and older from when the research was done, reviewed, re-reviewed, resubmitted, finally published 2 years later. And as you've seen in the last year with COVID, we've managed to launch entire vaccines in less than that time. So the world really has been, and that key point there, I think, that's come out about making sure that you're understanding the type of papers that journals are interested in. Many journals are being besieged by papers. So what's that focus? And I'm very pleased earlier on the session, people giving that distinctive focus of their journal to make that point. Okay, which now brings me on to Serena. You had raised the issue of the issue of publishing or perishing, and you know your view as a gatekeeper on the value of scientific work. Over to you.
Thanks, Barry. Well, yes, as a gatekeeper, as an editor, we are all gatekeepers in this role. I tend to see, but I think all of us tend to see, and this increasing pressure, particularly on the younger scholars, to publish. Publish or perish is not a new thing. certainly in the last 10 years, is growing in terms of culture of publisher parish. And maybe this is, in my humble opinion, not the way to go. And therefore, the issue would be to really educate our young scholars to more of a portfolio, something that I do remember when I was still a university student. That a university professor was a woman or a man of culture in a wider sense. And this balance, this acting balance between doing good quality research, maybe a little less, but good quality research, good teaching, and also serving the community, what we call in Italy the third mission. So we serve our communities, we give contribution to society and to the scholarly field. A better balance, I think, will bring necessarily to less of those, let's say, salami papers, less of those extremely long list of authors in papers, less of those unethical practices. Which I think in general, each author must be in a paper when contributes significantly to the development of the paper in some way. And many journals are stressing this issue now. But I think it's also good for the young scholars to remember that maybe sometimes one good paper will make them stand out of the crowd much more than 10 little papers. Let's say, use the word little.
Yep.
And therefore it is extremely important to think about this balancing of the portfolio. And it's not only important for personal reasons, it is important for society, because the higher the performances that our universities expect from us in terms of quantity, the more the risk is that each decade, the new generation is going to increase these numbers, but not necessarily increase the quality of research.
Okay. All right.
So that would be a suggestion
yeah.
to the younger. Yeah, maybe Perry, when we get more mature, we have a little more time to do quality research, to take things slowly. Yes, that's, of course, that's part of life. But the COVID has taught also us a new lesson, right? We can maybe 12 COVID papers in 1 year. My question is, what's going to be in 10 years from now? How many of those papers will actually have had a scientific or even a knowledge, as Gabby called it, impact? Yeah,
yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think there's an interesting question here, whether this focus that was raised earlier on the number of papers that people are publishing, is it if we become a numbers game, we're just cranking out publishing for the sake of publishing? Does anyone almost read them, or are we in an echo chamber, we're just reading our own stuff to publish more, and not engaging, which was put out here earlier, with the community, with the industry? I mean, we are an applied related field. We're not a purely theoretical field, which some areas would argue and make a different point. So I guess there is that really interesting connectivity there. And I think, you know, universities are part of the society. And we've also got to remember that. And what role is society expecting us to play? And universities have changed. In most societies, originally when universities started, they were more seen as religious institutions. It was more purely from that. And over time, those have been significant changes, whatever period you look. Obviously, we'll give the University of Bologna, which is often mentioned in European context, as the first university in Europe there. But if we go back to India, I believe, I think it was Nalanda University, if we go back even further in history and time. So there's quite an interesting sort of concept to think about, the role that we play, and therefore the role our research has in all that. Now, let me look back to Joseph, because one of the issues you wanted to raise here is we've had this tricky issue here about being a reviewer, the purpose of reviewing, the purpose of journals. And I think one of the challenges is how to become an effective and a good reviewer. So over to you, Joseph.
Right. I think I'm just as bad as Dimitrios, because I thought I was talking about desk rejection. Nevertheless, in order to be a good reviewer, you need to be able to deftly handle papers that are going to be rejected. So if you don't mind, Perry, let me first talk about desk rejection, because it's a pertinent topic, right?
And we've got that coming up later, but far away on that one.
Okay. And I'll get on to how to be a reviewer. But if anyone else is going to cover that topic later, I can forego that. Desk rejection. Right, I thought I'd mention this, and I'd like to echo Dimitrios's point about, firstly, about researchers. We spend a lot of time doing the research and writing the paper, less time on promoting the work. And I did this a very informal analysis with people, and it's staggering that people think when you do the research and you publish the paper, that's the end of things. That's not the end of things, right? Nevertheless, let me get on to desk rejection. The homily I always say to especially early career researchers is that you don't get a second chance to make a good first impression. You know, and as editors, our time is precious, and we often have to expedite things, right? And I always say that you know, we often get emails, informal emails. Can you have a look at this paper? And imagine if we did that for every person that emailed us, we wouldn't have any time to do our jobs. But nevertheless. So you don't get a good second chance to make a good first impression. I always say to authors, imagine you have this credibility account starting at 100, whatever the currency is, let's say $100. And as the editor goes line by line through your paper, you start losing money along the way, right? So it's especially important for researchers to think in that way, because every line, every word, authors need to be judicious about what they're doing. Read, reread, edit, re-edit. So editors have to make expeditious decisions. We can't spend hours of time poring over a paper, looking at it 4 or 5 times before we make a decision to reject it. And editors have honed the skill of rapidly assessing the merits of the paper. And I know, if I look at an abstract, and it's what we call in Australia an absolute dog's dinner, in other words, it's all over the place, you've already lost your 100 credit points. And you know, if you can't write an abstract thoroughly, then it's a slippery slope. Editors like to give authors the benefit of the doubt. Editors don't sit in a dark room, you know, with their, you know, with the hood over their head saying, "Now, who can I reject today?" We would like to give all authors the benefit of the doubt where we can. But the onus is on the authors to ensure that the paper is prepared meticulously, because otherwise we have no choice in the decision. And it makes me think of what Sarah Dolnikar says. We communicate on Twitter a lot, and she lamented that her paper got rejected in Annals, the journal she's the editor of, right? So, you know, no one escapes.
How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I don't, you have to ask her, but no one escapes scrutiny. So the onus is on people to ensure that their paper is meticulously presented, to avoid desk rejection. But desk rejection is what we have to get used to. Serena's topic, publish and perish. There's a third part to that: publish, perish, and learn to deal with rejection, because we all have to deal with rejection at some point. Stan has a 90% rejection rate, right? So you can see that the competition to elevate yourself is tough. So prepare your paper meticulously. I don't know if I have time to go through the question you asked.
No. I think that's a really good point, because we'll come with, in the other round, I think that was actually a question for Stan, but I think it's really important one, because, you know, with, as you mentioned, we are rejecting so many papers. And I think the other key point of that is, how do you make sure you're submitting to the right journal? Because obviously desk rejection takes up a lot of people's time. And so this comes down to, how do I correctly select a journal to send it to? And obviously I think there's fatal flaws. We get many papers and I just say, look, wrong journal. It's called the Journal of Vacation Marketing. Why have you sent me a paper on human resource management? You know, you know, the name kind of gives it away. So even some basic stuff like that often gets missed. So no, do hold that point, because I think it's a really important point for the audience, and for many academics seem to overlook. I often wonder if sometimes journal selection is a bit like, you know, pin the tail on the donkey. People do it blindfold. And we do, you know, I would encourage people, because it is a bad use of people's time, if I can put it, be so blunt on that. Now, before I move into the next round of questions, I'm just going to add my little pressing topic, which is the issue of journals, which unfortunately we're now seeing with this growth, which we've talked about, with the move online, which we talked about. We're also seeing a huge increase in the number of predatory and fake journals. And this, I think, is a particularly worrying issue. Now, obviously, open access opened the door to not only, I mean, there's many very good open access journals, but what it also opened the door to was a number of publishers who are basically making money and will publish anything they get sent. Now, even The Economist magazine weighed in on this last year, pointing out and showing some very interesting charts about the number of predatory journals. We're also seeing the insidious of fake journals. So the journal sounds like the journal you know, but they've changed one word. So it doesn't become anymore the journal, standard journal of the European Journal of Tourism Research. It comes the European Research Journal of Tourism. One word changes and it's a different journal. We've had with Sage other times when they've actually created fake websites. So it's a real journal, but the website has been faked. And we had situations where people had actually been asked and paid money to have their paper published, but it was a completely fake website that had been set up. So we have to be very careful. And there's also what we call mirror journals, who are journals that mirror a real journal as well. And actually, I often give a presentation where I show 3 journals. Each journal has exactly the same name. One is real, 2 are fake. And people can't pick it. So you have to be very, very careful. And unfortunately, there's something that's gone on. And sad to say, India has been at the forefront of being able to do this. And there's a certain business over in Hyderabad, which recently was fined by the US government, 14 million, I think, US dollars, if I recall, for these activities. So these are challenging issues. And of course, I'm not saying that it's something that's come out particularly from India, but there's a number of different countries where people are now seeing publishing as a way to make extraordinary profits from this. And I think, you know, as an academic community, this is something we have to be worried about and concerned about. So that's my pressing issue. Now, on to the various rounds of questions that we got. So I'm going to start off with Serena here. And the question we got here was, how do I go about identifying research topics that are going to help me stand a better chance of getting published? Have you got any advice or thoughts on that, Serena?
Okay, thanks, Barry. That's actually a very interesting question that we all go through, I guess, and particularly the younger scholars. My first take on it is that we ought to be current. We ought to be stay current, and to do that, there are maybe a few things that we can do. Scholars could read from the mainstream field. So if I am a marketing, tourist marketing scholar, I can go back to the mainstream marketing literature and dig into what is current there, what changes are happening. If I am a psychology oriented scholar, I go back to the mainstream psychology literature and so on. And that would be basic, okay. But there are a few things that we can do more than that. We can talk to the stakeholders. We can talk to the tourists. We can, in normal times, we can go out there in the industry and engage with the people who actually have the real problems in the field of hospitality and tourism. And by discussing with them, by collaborating, by opening up to new research collaborations, we might find good ideas. So let's say broaden our scope and to find good topics for research. So stay current in the sense of academic literature, stay current in the sense of keeping your senses open to what's happening in the industry and to the tourist interest. One other thing is certainly sometimes to collaborate with people within your country, and I go back to maybe also our Indian colleagues, but also collaborate with people outside your country and outside of your research group that sometimes even just thought and ideas out of the box, you have to think a little bit outside of the box. So these are a few suggestions that I can give, and I always think it is better to invest time at the beginning of the research process to find an interesting topic, then have to rechange it after the first round of reviewers because the reviewers are not happy with the focus of your topic or your paper. So invest more at the beginning to find interesting ideas, and then will make your journey smooth better.
Okay, that's a good point. Well, thank you for that. And now let's take that, Metin, if I might, over to your point, because one of the other questions we got asked here has been, how do I write up my rationale? So obviously I've got to pick a topic and find it, you know, to make it feel appealing to an editor. Because a lot of papers I get is just about identifying gaps in the literature. Is that it? Is it got to be more than that? Metin, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Perry. Well, I think the writing the rational part of any paper is I think the main reason of, you know, either accepting paper for a peer review or for a desk rejection, either by the editors or by the reviewers. So I think writing this part, the rational part, is very important when we design a paper, okay, for a submission to a good quality journal. I think we may think about two issues for this part. One is, okay, how this paper can be, you know, important to fill in the gap in the literature, okay. And this is, I think, what the majority of journal or journal editors is looking for. They always ask us, as the authors, how do you fill in the gap? Or if there is a gap first, and then how you can fill in this gap. Well, sometimes I disagree with the idea, but it happens. The second, I think we don't always have to fill in the gap. Sometimes we can also, you know, create a gap ourselves.
Right.
Okay, and this can also help, you know, the academia, the society to develop new theories for the future. The third one, I think we can test the findings of, you know, earlier empirical studies or either theories, okay? And this can also be, I think, for myself, you know, a contribution to the field.
Right. Okay, well, that's a really good points there, because I think one of the big challenges is justifying why people are doing the paper. And I find as an editor, you know, going back to the earlier point Joseph made about, as an editor, I look at what is it this paper's going to do? And if you can't justify that, to give a rationale about why I should spend my time or anyone else who want to read it, there's got to be a clear rationale underlying the purpose of this research and that background. Now that leads us into the next challenge, is the question
Perry,
about
before
the
you
literature
go,
review. Yeah, sure.
Perry, before you go, I just, when I get a paper in tourism review, I'm just going through very quickly, and I'm kind of trying to understand the motivations of the authors. And sometimes I hear, I need a promotion. I need a pay rise. My boss told me to do this. And I've done, you know, Serena talked about the salami publishing. I've published 5 papers on this topic. And if you manage to get the 6th one, I'll be winning. And desk rejection is coming very quickly, 65% in tourism review. But sometimes you get these papers that people are really passionate about what they're doing, and they're absolutely engaging in what they're doing, and they're bringing, you know, they bring their best self in there. And the other thing I really, really hate is when I get a paper and has got spelling mistakes on the title, and, you know, you just start reading the abstract like Joseph was saying, and, you know, 6th line down, you kind of say, okay, you really need someone to help you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point too, and I completely agree with you. The number of papers we've had in that I've seen where I feel it's a promotion. The author might have what it's written is, I found this data lying around after I did another study, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it, so I've written it up, and this is the paper. And you go, that's not a rationale for a paper, just because you happen to have some more data lying around from a leftover survey. But that's kind of what you get. So I think
having said that, Perry, as university senior administrators, and, you know, many of us have had positions like that, I also get emails from people who say, can you accept my pay by Monday, please? Because I'm going to lose my job if I don't have that. And I think it's a responsibility from the university and the administrators to actually support the young researchers to understand what it's all about. And, you know, accept my paper by Monday. Can I have it printed? Can you give me a certificate? And can I have it with the, you know, with page numbers? It's not going to help anybody, but we really need, we are doing it. And people have done it to us, and we've tolerated for many years and all the rest of it. But this is something that universities have got to learn, especially from some countries. Let me mention, because this is a real story from Korea. I'm going to lose South Korea. I'm going to lose my job if I don't get my paper accepted by Monday.
Yeah, yeah. And I've had similar kind of things. And again, the problem I see with that is that then opens the door to a lot of the fake predatory type of journals, because they'll turn around and do it if they got cash. And so what the universities, by not understanding the rest of the system and pushing people like that, creates these shortcuts, so we become our own worst enemy. And I think that's a very dangerous situation we've put ourselves in there. So thank you for those additional points there, Dimitris. Now, when we go into that standard, one of the issues then is developing up the literature review. So people have got a good rationale for why they're doing it. Now they move into the literature review. And so one of the often reasons that papers fail is they haven't done a strong enough. And another comment I often get is, well, your literature review is not up to date enough. And in fact, I had one the other day, so it wasn't actually quoting any papers from 2021. Well, given the fact we were only in the end of the first month of the year, I thought that was a bit much. But anyway, these are some of the things that comments I'm seeing. So any thoughts there from you?
Yeah, the literature review is a very important part of the paper. So I would give the following recommendations. First, the literature review must have some logical structure. So it needs to have a structure, because if we have, let's say, 2,000, 3,000 word literature review for a full paper, which is just a monolithic text, it will be very difficult for the editor and the reviewers to read, let alone the other readers. So it's good to structure the literature review in several sections, 2, 3, 4, depending on how depending on the topic. And this will make the literature review first more readable. Also, the literature review needs to be logical, relevant, and focused. So if you write about a particular topic, then the literature review needs to be connected to that topic. Because sometimes I've seen literature reviews, so for example, about, especially last year, about COVID-19, that repeat only what is COVID-19 and what happened and how bad it is. So we know this. So what is the literature review is not quite relevant to the topic. Also, it needs to be connected to the aim and objectives. So what we define as objectives in the introduction, then will determine to some extent the structure and the content of the literature review, what we need to look at from a theoretical perspective. Also, the sources need to be recent. I usually recommend to my students for their dissertations to have something like 60–80% of their references coming for the last 5 years. But for research papers, this is even more important. This does not mean that we need to cite every single paper published in 2021, including those that are still under review, but or that we should not cite papers published 50 years ago. But these papers should not dominate. Also, because the language of science is English. I would love if the language of science, of scientific communication, was Bulgarian, but unfortunately it's not. It's English. So we have to accept this fact. Probably more than 85–90% of all academic scientific publication is in English. This means that the literature review should be based on international sources published in English language. Of course, local publications, they are very rare, they might be very relevant, they need to be cited as well. That's very important. But to submit a paper to tourism review, which is entirely based on reviewing publications in Bulgarian journals, I'm pretty sure that Dimitrios will smile and will say, sorry, desk rejected. Also, 3 other comments which I think that they would improve the literature review. A figure with the links between the concepts, something like that shows the links of the different concepts, something that Dimitrios likes a lot for the encyclopedia. And by the way, he returned one of my entry because he wanted a figure there. Thank you, but now it looks much better. So, a figure is worth 1,000 words. It's much better to have a figure showing the relationships between the concepts. Sometimes, instead of a figure, you may put a table, a summary table with the characteristics and the findings of key publications. So instead of explaining in 1,000 words who wrote what, etc., just summarize this in a table, refer to the table, and write 300 words with the most important findings. And of course, something that we always say, this is critical evaluation. It's not who said what only, but it is so what. What conclusions can we make from these publications? What are what is the theoretical contribution? So what is the link between them? So dealing with critical evaluation, not just simple summary of the publications.
That's some really good points there, and I think I noticed that from different countries, and I think you made 2 good points there. One is the challenge, and you know, I was just, again, accident of birth. I happened to be born, and so in England, when English is my mother tongue, so I haven't had to deal with Bulgarian, Greek, Turkish, Italian, which you've got on the panel here today, to deal with that. So that was pure luck there. I think the other point there that is very relevant about this issue about how to present that information and tables, there are other ways of doing that. One of the things I've noticed about papers I've received, particularly from India, has been that the amount of literature review seems to take up a greater percentage of the paper than other countries where the literature is very, very short and they'll spend much more time explaining the methodology. Or if I get a paper from France, sorry, the philosophy, they want to really give you the philosophy because that's a much deeper cultural point they want to get across. Whereas other papers will put more on the findings section, or dare I say, the conclusion. So it's the challenge of getting that balance right. And so these are some observations I've seen over different papers, and I see that there are cultural and presumably differences from emanating from that and from the education systems in different countries. Now let's moving on from that. Sam, thank you so much for those comments, because one of the other questions we got posed with is, when it comes to methodology, should I take a qualitative or quantitative approach? What is more likely to get me published? So Gabby, what are your thoughts on that? And should people try novel approaches? Because I know you've done quite a bit of experimental. I was listening to your colleague Sarah Dolikat speaking at the conference at the opening keynote yesterday. And she was making reference to the sort of experiential work that you're doing and so forth. Now, is that a risk as a researcher to do that, or should I play it safe? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely not. And the first question around should I do a qualitative and quantitative research, that very much depends on what you're looking at and how much research has already been established and how new and novel your research is, because the decision to do a qualitative study or a quantitative study shouldn't be determined by the preference of the journal. And I would safely say that most journals these days don't have preferences. In the days of, oh, if you go for this journal, they like qualitative work, or this journal is more empirical quantitative work, are gone. And I think it depends on the study and how much information is out there, and whether you're taking a deductive approach or an inductive approach to your study. We crave novel methods. I get excited. I do a lot of the desk considerations for JVM, and when I get a paper in that's used lab methods such as eye tracking technology, or physiological measurement of emotion, or virtual reality, I get really excited, and I encourage you, if you have access to such equipment, to explore these methods, because technology is moving very quickly, particularly in the research methodology space. And I think the more we can learn about these methods in tourism, I mean, they've been around in the marketing discipline, psychology discipline for years now, but the more we can bring these over to tourism, the richer we'll be able to, the deeper we'll be able to explore the tourist behaviour. And, you know, the days of self-report emotions are long gone. And I think, yeah, it's not a matter of should I do a qual or a quant paper, it's a matter of what your research problem is telling you to do. And there is no risk in being novel in your methods as long as the methods have been done well and your methodology section is tight and explains everything that you've done in terms of bringing your research to fruition.
All right, well, thanks for that, because I think some people have you know, been worried that some journals won't focus on or be willing to take that. And then another challenge, of course, for some journals has been finding the reviewers as well, particularly when you go down novel things. And I fear that's inhibited us from people from trying things in terms of going forward. So, but Dimitris, let me just circle back to you. One of the points we were just discussing there is the balance within a paper. And so one of the questions we've had here is, how much balance should there be when it comes to the discussion? Now, given the comment I made about how there seems to be different countries which have got slightly different views of how that should be put together in a paper coming from different forms of discourse, this is a very broad question about how much discussion there should be in a paper. But when you're looking at papers and research, what's your sort of feeling on how this balance should be?
Yeah, we are looking for meaningful papers that they say, look, this is what the literature is saying, and the literature is up to date. Then we're looking to, we identified this gap, we did this research, and back to your qualitative or quantitative, I prefer mixed methods actually, where people are bringing different kind of research designs together, and then it means that in terms of the discussion and then the implications in the industry. I think the papers need to be balanced, and I encourage people to actually read the tourism review before they submit to tourism review.
Right.
And it's quite funny, you know, sometimes you're going through the reference and there's not a single paper from tourism review. They've never read the journal, and they would like to publish in the journal. How can that happen? So it's really about look into what kind of papers we are publishing. Look how the balance is coming together. And it's not that difficult, really. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to add value and needs to have an impact to society. So if you're spending all your time giving me mathematical formulas, go to a journal of mathematics. You don't come to a journal of tourism.
Yeah,
that's my.
Because I think it's a good point you made, Danny. I see some papers that we get that come in. These are my, you know, literature review, here's my study, here's my findings, and then literally that's it. Thank you. Job done. Yeah. And there's no you know, discussion, there's no what the contribution is, that sort of gets missing, and I often find that's another reason people.
I think the most important thing, Perry, is someone who would like to publish in a journal read from that journal before
that's a very good point.
they put the paper together. And actually, I've got a cheeky question to ask you, which I've changed my mind recently, and I think a lot of people will find that useful. Do you use an academic editor to help you develop your script? And I changed recently my view on this, because I suggest particular people who used to be academics. One of them used to be at the University of Queensland, Donna, who is doing a fantastic job helping authors to bring people out, rather than one of these kind of places where you're sending your paper, they check your English, they charge you $200 and they come back. Someone who can actually help you develop the paper academically, because I recognize that a lot of people from different countries that have never actually worked in this kind of system, they'll never progress to the next level until they've got the support. And, you know, Joseph said earlier, how long do you think an editor can look into a paper? And how long do you think we can spend on a paper trying to suggest things? I certainly cannot edit every single paper again. We get 620 papers per year. And I think that is something, I don't know if other editors are using colleagues for academic and editing, but I think this is money worth spending and working with the right people. I think that's the critical thing, working with the right people to actually develop your ideas in a format that can be published. Because we really like to publish good ideas, but if they are not on the right format, you're going to get desk rejected or you're going to get rejected again.
No, and I think that's a very good point. Obviously, dare I say, people who English is their first language and they've also come through a particular education system, it does give them a possible advantage. And the papers I tend to see is the question about how do we get voices from other parts of the world, from other experiences, to come up in the journals. And so, you know, it's quite clear when we look across the journals that there's many countries which I've never ever had a paper from. You know, I babied through a paper not long ago from Albania because we never had a paper from Albania before, and I really felt it was important that we started to show to have something. And I thought it was an interesting concept as well for that particular thing. But you're right, Dimitris, it was a lot of work and effort that those things take, and I think there's, you know, other sources of way of helping academics and for academics to realise that. They need certain support. I mean, we're not all good at all things, let's face it, in terms of writing, research, etc., and to what we can do to support those. No, I think it's a very good point. Joseph, just to go on to one of the things about data, one of the questions that often comes up is how old can my data be? And, you know, at what point is that, you know, that it's not something I'm willing to accept? So is it 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? At what point? Now, obviously, different journals and different disciplines got different views on this. Obviously, if we're a history journal, it'd be a very different view. But what sort of things are we looking at here? And what's your sort of feeling on that?
Right. Thanks, Perry. I'll keep this very brief because I sense that we could talk about this for a while. So what I'd like to do, I guess it may seem like a lame response, but I always say it depends, right? As you say, it depends on the journal, depends on the editor, depends on the subject matter of the paper. But let me answer that question according to the two various methods. When is primary data too late to publish? Just in case some of you watching are not able to distinguish between what primary data is and what secondary data is. Secondary data is data that's already available, you know, government data, that kind of thing. Primary data is what we go out to do as researchers, I guess the unique contribution to knowledge we make through our own studies. So when it comes to when is data too late to publish, let me start with quantitative, and I'll keep this very brief. The question that researchers need to ask themselves is their data long run or is it short run? You know, at the moment, we're getting COVID papers where people are making equivocal pronouncements about what the last 12 months is bringing us and what the future will look like, right? Yeah. That gives us an idea that short-run data can't possibly make these equivocal judgments over a period of time. And researchers need to ask themselves, is this data snapshot or does it provide a trend? When we say snapshot, 1 year provides a snapshot, 10 years provide a time series analysis. And for us to make a decent contribution to the discussion, time series analysis is what editors tend to prefer because it shows a definitive trend over a time. When it comes to qualitative, I tend to think that qualitative data usually stands the test of time better. As you said, historical data, right? If we're looking backwards, you know, that rarely changes. You know, ethnography and autoethnography has become quite a sexy topic for researchers to use. And very often they use it as a kind of vehicle to get the paper accepted. But qualitative data requires a depth. And very often without that depth, it doesn't matter whether...
I don't know if it's just me. I think Joseph is frozen.
Oh, yeah, I'm back. I'm not sure where I stopped off, but qualitative data usually stands the test of time better. You know, if we think about ethnography or social and cultural impact or attitudes and behaviors, a lot of times we are looking to what's happened, right? So I think the big thing we need to understand is long run versus short run and relevance of the data. This is why Dimitrios probably rejects a lot of papers on COVID-19 because you can't possibly chart long-term trends when COVID-19 is actually still in play.
And when they talk about the impacts of
impact. Yeah. Now these are some really good points because I think this is challenging about how fast or how long you can sit on data. And obviously it takes time if you've done a very big survey to work out different parts of it. So I think these are really pressing sort of issues. But Serene, I'm going to circle back to you now, because we've heard already one of the frustrations from editors is, this whole issue of that desk rejects and so forth. We're going to come back to that again in a moment. But one of the issues that keeps coming up, and Dimitris said again, don't submit to a journal you've never read, I think, which is a bit of a golden rule. And one of the questions I ask you is, what sort of steps do you think someone should go through to find the right journal to submit their manuscript to?
Thank you, Barry. Very interesting question, and I think the most problematic issue with the question is, how do we define right? What is a right journal? Okay, so I make my definition for this audience, and the definition is that it should write for the audience of the journal, for those scholars and those industry stakeholders who are going to read the journal. So therefore, in this perspective, let's say one of the first things to do is to get familiar with the journal. It's about reading and understanding the focus, the aim, and the scope of the journal. Sure, it's also understanding the geographical scope. For example, we have the case of the European Journal. It's about understanding the journal as a methodological approach that's preferred, and it is true. I am in agreement with my colleagues. There is usually almost accept all different methodologies. However, there are some journals that are specialized. So if I really got a very, very good method paper, I go to the Journal of Mixed Method, although this might be in tourism. So these are things that we may want to consider. Then there are journals that really bridge a lot more with the industry than others. So maybe if my paper has that in mind as an audience, that's where I should go. Journal of Vacation Marketing, I remember always being one of the leaders in this sense. And of course, another way to get familiar with the journal is certainly read some articles. If you have not done so at the beginning of the process, at least do it at the moment you have to select the journal. But one other suggestion could be into getting familiar with the journal is to also browse the list of editorial board members and check what they have published, and if anyone in the board members has expertise, has done some really incredible research, for example, on psychophysiological measurements of emotions, like Gabi was saying before, then think about the linkage between your research and contribution to that journal in a different way, because you see that the paper might actually be evaluated by somebody who's familiar with that topic. And this is a more, journal-related approach. But of course, going back to the issue of having to publish, because this is part of our job, for many it's important for the career. One thing not to forget is to look into the lists of available journals, starting from the international rankings, moving down to the databases that we all know has been very influential. So those journals who have impact factor in the field of hospitality, tourism, and leisure, and then moving down to your national rankings. In many countries, scholars are basically forced in some way to publish within certain national rankings. So maybe that's really important also for the young scholars everywhere in the world. And last but not least, even university level, we might have rankings that are even more precise in terms of what is required. So the right journal depends on whether you're looking into the audience side or you're looking also into your fulfillment of your duties, if not your career progression and so on. So that would be some suggestions for the audience.
Well, that was a very comprehensive, and these are the challenges. So, as I said earlier, submitting to a journal is not a pin the tail on the donkey exercise. You really do need to think through, where the issues, as you mentioned, about the rankings and so forth. And I'll be honest, as an editor, this has even come as a surprise to us. I suddenly started getting a lot of papers from Spain. And I couldn't work out why I'd suddenly become so popular in Spain. And it turned out the Spanish government had done a rankings of the journals, and JDM had ended up in the highest category or whatever. And suddenly I'm getting, you know, tens of papers from Spain, whereas in previous years I'd hardly received any. So obviously that had affected where people were starting to submit their journals to. It would have been nice if the Spanish government had given me a heads up on what was going on, but that was suddenly what happened. And then the challenge as an editor was, do we have enough reviewers who understand the context that we're getting papers from in Spain? So these become the sort of challenges. Now, Metin, if I might turn to you, because before you were talking about this issue of a rationale. So now once I've taken Serena's advice, I've selected the journal, do I need to sell my paper to the editor? So how should I structure my letter of submission or the form when I put it in to generate interest in the editor for you to actually say, look, this paper could be something that's a good fit here? What sort of gets your attention, and what sort of things, if I was a submitting author, should I think about saying?
Oh, thank you, Perry. I think writing a paper is the difficult part of our, profession. And once we have finished everything, writing the paper, preparing tables, figures, and so on. And this is the tiny thing, but it is also important to write a letter to the editor. So sometimes it's also boring for myself, but we have to do it, as an author, at least to convince the editor, saying that the paper is good to be published, or at least to be, sent out for the review process. So what we can do? Well, we can be more. We don't have to be more personal. So we can use a more professional language, explaining or introducing the content of our research by giving some information about the purpose, methodology, okay, and how the study may be different from earlier studies, etc. So it shouldn't be too long, okay? So it shouldn't be too long to write a sexy letter to Dimitrios, okay, to convince him that my paper will be accepted by himself in the same day. So this is not possible. I know he likes promotion, but this is also a good way of making the promotion for the paper, also for the journal.
All right. Well, look, that's a really good point, Metin. And I see a lot of colleagues there smiling, laughing, and nodding. So I'm going to ask a couple of the other editors if you'd like to jump into this point, because obviously this is a big issue, avoiding the desk reject. Because a lot of people forget what a huge percentage of papers do get desk rejected. And to come back to Serena's point, if you haven't selected the right journal to send your paper to, your chance of rejection are much higher. So I didn't know if anyone else, I can see Stan, you're kind of smiling there, and Gabby, I know you deal with a lot of the desk thing. Have you got any other thoughts on this?
If I can just chime in and say something really obvious, check the style and formatting guidelines and make sure that you have followed the specific guidelines for that particular journal, because there's nothing more frustrating than receiving papers that are, as someone said earlier, I think it was you, Joseph, in my finest Australian slang, a dog's breakfast. Now, I find it almost disrespectful in a way, in that you haven't taken the time to simply follow the guidelines that are put there for a purpose before submitting your paper. And that's the quickest way to get your paper back. Now, sometimes we're kind and we say, please, if we see promise in the paper, we'll say, please format your paper in accordance with the journal guidelines. The other one is, watch your title lengths. Don't have a title that goes for 4 lines. Okay, so really snappy and impactful title lengths, because at the end of the day, you want people reading your papers, and we want people to review your papers, and having a poorly constructed title is a good way to get reviewers to decline our review requests, as well as not get yourself any citations. So that's all. That's a bugbear of mine.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. We've had some, I've had seen some papers where the title was longer than the abstract. You know, it was quite incredible. And really, you've got to wonder what. So I think these are really good points to bear in mind when you're thinking about submitting. I mean, they seem obvious, as Gabby just said, but it's amazing how many people don't follow them. Stan, you got another comment you wanted to jump in with there.
Yeah, regarding the desk rejection, unfortunately, this is something that the editors have to do, not because they have to see the suffering of the authors, and we don't feed on author suffering, but this is because of different reasons. Papers may be desk rejected first because the paper is obviously outside of the scope of the journal. So I've received in the GHTR papers related to engineering, to math, general philosophy, and when you open, when you start looking for the word tourism, it doesn't appear anywhere in the text. Obviously, it goes beyond the scope. Also, GHTR is a regional journal, which means that empirical papers must have some European implications or European focus. And when the paper goes outside of the scope, it gets rejected. Or if there are too many studies on that topic. While we had the discussion, I just checked in our system how many papers we received last year. 42 papers on COVID-19. Only one was accepted. So everything was rejected. 35 were desk rejected. So we talk about 85% desk rejection on COVID-19 papers. They all deal with the same thing. Or with lack of contribution to knowledge, or descriptive nature of the paper, or weak theoretical background, or irrelevant methodology, or very weak methodology. Just presenting nice pie charts and nice tables doesn't mean that the paper is good enough. Or if there are discrepancies in explanations. I've seen papers where they write something in the abstract, as for example, what is their what is their research population, the sampling time, sample size, and you read after that in the explanations in the methodology, completely different sampling type. And when you ask the authors why is that difference, they say we made a mistake. No, you don't make a mistake with your sample size and your sample. This is not a mistake. It's a deliberate change. You can't have a mistake there. This is like forgetting your own name. You can't do it. Or some unethical practices, like of course plagiarism, data fabrications, but or for example changing the wording of questions in a questionnaire after data were collected. So you have them in one language, they were translated, submitted to the journal. Then the reviewer says something. Okay, this is not this scale is not what you measure. Then you receive different wording of the same questions. So obviously here you have unethical practice. Of course, when you have small samples, etc. I would consider this as essential things. There are also some additional reasons for rejection. These are things which you can fix by writing. While the previous one you can't fix, but these you can fix with writing. For example, additional explanations about the theoretical rationale, or there need to be more explanations about the methodology, or there's a lack of discussion, or theoretical managerial policy implications are not outlined, or the language is far from perfect. I'm not a native speaker, so my English is probably at the level of B2, so I'm not even C1. Our son is C2, but I'm not. So I'm not looking for something as and most of the submissions come from non-native speakers in the GHTR. So we are not looking for perfect Shakespearean type of Queen's English written, but at least understandable. This can be changed later on. And something to say as final, if someone does not cite GHTR, this is not a reason for rejection in GHTR, because there are topics which have not been published before that in GHTR. So there might not be papers that are relevant for that particular paper. So yeah, I would love if people cite the GHTR when they submit, but this is not a criterion for desk rejection.
No, that's great. I'm very glad to hear you say that as well, because I know some journalists have been trying to get up their self, whatever. Yes, don't worry, Senator. I'm not very good at Shakespearean or the Queen's English myself. I probably, because I left England so long ago. But anyway, these are really good points I think you've made there. Really excellent. And Gabby, I'm just going to turn to you because as editors, we're very familiar with the processes. And you know, I think Stan, your point is very well made that in fact, the challenge for editors is to desk reject. But what I'm hearing from you and from so many, actually, it's really self-rejection, because what's happening is the paper rejects itself because they haven't done the simple things which we've asked people to do. And I know that sounds, maybe I don't mean it to be insulting to people, but we ask for fairly basic things, the formatting, the way references are done, what an abstract is. And if that isn't done, it's simply not going to get over that hurdle. So these may seem basic, but you're right. It's amazing how many papers don't just meet with that. Now, I'm mindful of time. We've only got about 15 minutes to go. But Gabby, if I might just ask you just to run through, just so everybody, our audience, understand what the sort of process is. We've covered it up to getting the paper on your desk. What's the process, just quickly, so that everyone understands what happens to papers? Because I think it's really important everyone's got a clear idea.
Yeah, it is quite complex, and there are various traps along the way where papers can get delayed, and I think everyone needs to understand that. But because it might feel like your paper's laying dormant and no one cares, but actually everyone's working really hard to make this process as smooth as possible. So obviously it comes in, it gets checked for formatting, and it gets checked for conformity, and we make sure sometimes people accidentally have their names on the paper, sometimes, which is a problem. So we have to send it back and ask you to remove the name. So we do those basic desk checks, and then that's done by, generally done by Julie, who's our administration person, and then it'll come to myself and sometimes Perry, and we look at the content of the paper, and we think about whether or not it's worth sending out for review, because the worst thing we can do as editors is waste reviewers' time and send them papers that aren't really quite there yet. And reviewers can get quite cross about that, and then they won't review for us anymore. So it's our job, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're sending out quality work to our reviewers. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for new contributions to knowledge. We're making sure that your paper's just not replicating what's already been done, and so on. Then it goes out to review. Now, sometimes this can take up to 2 weeks or longer to find. I wish I had some screenshots of some attempts to send out for review, and I'm sure all my fellow editors on the panel today would have similar screenshots where it could take 9, 10 invitations to actually get someone to say, yes, they'll review your paper. Some journals have 3 reviewers. We have 2, but that can take up to 10 attempts. And then these people have 2 weeks to make their decision as to whether they're going to say yes or no. So there, as you can understand, there's a bit of time lapse there. So they take 2 weeks, and that's why if you get a review request and you can't do it, please respond straight away as soon as you get it, because if it sits there for 2 weeks, that's time, dead time that's wasted. And so by the time we've gone through, if 6 people have said no, that can be up to 12 weeks before we even find a reviewer. Then if we get a reviewer, it goes out to review and it comes back to us within 30 days, hopefully. Sometimes reviewers are a bit naughty and take a bit longer. Comes back to the editor for a decision. And this is generally a reject, a minor revisions or a major revisions. And so Perry usually deals with that part of it. Go back to you do the revisions, comes back in, it may go back to the reviewers, depending on how extensive the revisions were. Goes back to the reviewers, they then have 30 days, send it back, and so on. And then it's an accept or reject, which is that decision's made by the editor, pending on what the reviewers have said about your paper and their reviews. And then, of course, it's over to our desktop publishers, which is the journal administrators, to help you polish off your paper for publication.
Yep. That's right. And so each journal will go through a fairly similar process. And may I add, just as we're doing this conference in India, SAGE actually has its publication center in India. So all our papers actually end up in India at this point, by the way. So look, it's a global. Gabby and Julie are based in Australia. I'm based in Malaysia. Our publication office is in London, and where the actual publishing happens and the editorial side of it is in India. It's a global production. So, you know, when people see the journals, often they forget just how much is behind all this. Now, as you're picking up, it takes quite a bit of time. Joseph, if I just turn to you, Gabby got a little bit of indication about how long these things take. For your journal, and we can't deal with everyone today, but just sort of what sort of delays and how long do you see these things taking? Because as Gabby's mentioned, there are various hiccups. We can't make people review a paper. As much as we'd like to put people into an arm lock and bounce on top of them, get them to do it, I'm sure you've got a couple of sumo wrestlers in Japan who you'd like to dispatch it sometimes to get papers reviewed. We can't make people do that. So what are you finding as an editor?
Yep, right. Thanks, Perry. Thanks, and I think Gabby's covered some of the essential bits. But the bottlenecks, as Gabby said, include editor backlogs. You know, sometimes there are seasons, right? When people are on holidays, just after the holidays, you will get a deluge of papers. So try to avoid. It's like driving in peak traffic, right? Try to avoid those peak submission times. They generally follow holidays. As Gabby said, the reviewer responses, author responses are part of the backlog, and the publisher back office processes. For us in tourism geographies, the editor will often desk reject it within 1 to 4 days, and if not, we get lots of emails reminding us to do that. And in terms of finding reviewers, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, in terms of reviewing the papers. So this can balloon up, and authors don't understand. All authors understandably want their papers reviewed very quickly and published very quickly. There are some journals that do that. There are some that charge article processing fees. Some of you will know them, right? Where they are onto you within 3 days and 5 days if you're the reviewer and you don't do it. So it varies with journals, but the bottom line is, if the paper's well crafted, well edited, it will sail through the process relatively quickly. So it depends. We're not as quick as Dimitrios, but I would say 2 to 3 months is a really good timeline for authors to expect to get to the back end of the process.
Right. Okay then. So that's now just going to Dimitrios, because I've got another question to you there. But you've taken, just as a bit of contrast here, you've I know tried to push very hard on a faster turnaround on that, and that presumably presents you with some challenges too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got into situations where I get a review of one of my papers that I've forgotten I've written because it's coming back, in 5, 6, 7 months. And I said, what? When did I write this paper? Never mind about reviewing. So many of you who have actually submitted in tourism review, you know that you get almost an instant reaction, whether it's going forward or not. And I think authors appreciate that, because if I desk reject a paper, they can go somewhere else, or they can see why this desk reject the paper, improve and resubmit it to review. And I think the role of the editor is to accept very good papers. And we are here not to reject, but we're here to accept very good papers. And I think the role of the author is not to get rejected. I think it's really important, because some of my PhD students are coming along and said, I really want my paper to get accepted. I said, no, you don't understand the game. What we're trying to do is not to get rejected. Okay. So, for all the reasons that Gabi said, don't give the opportunity to the editor to reject your paper. And let me take you through some of the numbers of tourism review. 65% of the papers who arrive on my desk, they are desk rejected within 3 days. I have a look very quickly. I do all the desk rejections myself, so I know that they're consistent and fair and all the rest of it. 65% are desk rejected. Then what's happening is that the rest, 35% are going for reviewing. 20% are getting rejected on R1. So when the reviewers are coming back and say, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that, then you have desk rejection for 20%. Now, something we haven't talked about is that the reviewers are actually consultants to the editors. Sometimes the editors may disagree with the reviewers, and ultimately the decision and the responsibility lies with the editor. So 65 plus 20 gives us 85% of the papers that are coming to tourism review. They are rejected within the first 40 days. So that leaves me with 15% of the papers that have been submitted to work with. Remember, I still need about 80 papers per year. I get 620 last year. So I've got to filter, I've got to filter, I've got to filter. So out of this 15%, they'll probably go into 3 rounds or 4 rounds. The maximum we've got is 7 rounds of revisions. And there is the responsibility of the author to work with the reviewers and the editor to improve the paper. I had situations where authors said, how dare the reviewer telling these things about my paper? I know best. It doesn't take you anywhere, right? And I had a situation. I mean, so what happens is that if the authors at R1, they're going to the next stage, they look very carefully on what the reviewers are saying. They're creating a very nice table and says, yes, I understand that. This is what they've done. No, I don't agree with that because of this and this and these reasons, and therefore I'm doing this. So all of those things reduce the time of the decision, both for the reviewers, both for the editors. So what's happening is that then this 15% is going around a couple of times, and I reject another 3% in R2 or on R3. I try not to do that. And then 12% is getting accepted. So this is the numbers for tourism review.
All right, well, thank you for sharing this. Yeah.
I think it's very critical for people to understand that, you know, you don't really want to lock a paper in for a year and a half, because by that time you lose the will to leave. And also science has moved, and you have missed the promotion, and you have missed everything, and you know, there's more things that they can wait for a year and a half, unless you're doing a, I don't know. And especially because I'm coming from technology, a year and a half, it's kind of a century in our kind of area.
Yeah.
So
I think, well,
your role is not to get rejected, and my role is to accept the good papers.
Right, and I think you said that very well. And I think these are the challenges, and to see papers go around, and I mean, I think I'm seeing papers go through more rounds of revision than they were in the past, I think, you know, but, you know, the challenge also is, as you mentioned, there's some reviewers get their heels really dug into a particular issue. And as editor, you know, our challenge is we find ourselves in a Mexican standoff between reviewers and authors. And so, you know, some people don't appreciate the role as editors and the many facets that we've got in all that. Now, look, gentlemen and ladies, I'm very conscious of time for the conference. They've got the next session starting in 15 minutes. We actually had 4 rounds of questions, and we've covered an awful lot today. I'm amazed at how the time has flown by. There's an awful lot here. And we still have got 2 more rounds of questions, which I know we're just not going to get to. So look, what I thought I might do is to end this session by just going around and seeing if there's a closing comment from each of the editors on the panel, just as a way of just closing off this panel before Lee Jolliffe does the next keynote. So Serena, mind if I just circle back to you? If there's any sort of short closing point you would just like to make to wind the panel up. So Serena, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Perry. Yes, just last piece of advice. Sometimes scholars, especially the younger one, but all of us, we get to the findings, we have almost finished the paper, we're really tired, and it's obvious because the process is a long one. But then there is the issue of writing the conclusions, the discussions, the implications. I always recommend there to take a little distance, to take steps backward, to go back to your research questions and try to take time also and embrace other perspectives before you embark in writing what I consider one of the most important parts of your research, where you have you tied up your initial research question, your theory, to actually how you have incremented knowledge in our field. So that would be one way to gain depth and breadth in your research. And good luck with your
Very good
submissions.
advice there. Thank you very much for that. Joseph, might I go to you in Japan? Again, one piece of advice or a closing thought you pass on?
Yeah, very good. I will just be quick. As Dimitrios said, don't question the integrity of editors and reviewers. Very often when people get rejected, they send a nasty email saying that the reviewers don't know what they're talking about. Because most editors and reviewers review across journals, right? And if you get a desk rejection, make sure you make the changes, because chances are, if it's, for example, about tourism and resilience, it will come to me if it's submitted to Dimitrios. So I will have seen it before, right? So keep that in mind, and good luck.
All right, very good advice. Very good sobering advice there. Stan, have you got some closing advice to give to our audience?
Yeah, I can only say that authors should be bold, because shy genes are not transferred. That's it. They have to be bold. Aim big. That's it.
Aim big. All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Dimitrios, what about yourself? You've had a few comments on that. A last thought from you?
I think we kind of covered a lot of material, and I think a lot of colleagues will find that useful. On my YouTube channel, I've got some very long kind of presentations I've done in different universities, where we kind of go step by step and I show the mechanics. And I think people will benefit by watching those and understanding what's happening. I think they should come forward and being part of the community. Just remember, it's not a game, it's a community. And like Joseph said, anything that is on technology or smart or things are going to come to me wherever, in whichever journal you're sending it. So if I'm rejecting you from one journal, I'm gonna reject you from the second journal until you've actually sorted out the things that we talked about to improve the paper. And I can guarantee you that any paper on robotics is going to go to Stan. Absolutely. And I know now his reviewing style, and I can say, yeah, Stan has just reviewed that. So I think colleagues who are listening and they'd like to take advantage, have a look on my YouTube on those long videos. I think one is 2 hours that explains all the mechanics and all the rest of it. And I think be part of the community, be a good citizen, offer to do reviews, offer to engage, learn from the experience, and be part of the community. And I saw that with the encyclopedia as well. Bring a community together, a global community that brings science forward. Thank you.
And I think, again, we made the point earlier, be part of that community, put your hand up, review, offer to do that. We're seeing more papers come in from India. We need reviewers who are prepared to put the time in, because we all want reviewers who have got context as much as content for that, for where research is coming from. Metin, from Turkey, over to you to any last thoughts or comments, advice?
Okay, yes, well, as the authors, we should carry on writing papers, editing journals, and also publishing new journals. This is the circulation of our life. It should happen. The second thing I think I should say, that we should pay more attention to quality other than quantity. And the third thing is that I think now we have so many opportunities, because of different things in our life, in the world. So we can, I think, to increase the impact of, tourism research to other disciplines, we should work together. We should collaborate with other people from different disciplines, at least to, I think, create a more, impactful interdisciplinary research in tourism. I also advise the young scholars here to carry on, working on their papers, and even they get a rejection from any journal, they should go to the next one and so on. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we received a very fast rejection from Dimitrios from social media, but now the paper was accepted by the second journal. So we are happy to have the paper perhaps coming out in the next couple of months. So
excellent.
Thank you.
I see.
So, sorry, Metin, apologize, but
there you go.
Something reasons.
We're tough to each other. And Gabby, to you, last but not least, for the final word here, your advice, comments, thoughts for our audience?
I would say that don't assume because there's a gap in the literature that the gap's worth filling, and ask yourself, there could be a reason why no one's addressed that gap, in that it's not important and nobody cares. So ask yourself, the so what question. So why should people care about my research? Why should people be excited about my research? And really think about that carefully. Why will industry love this research? And why will my academic colleagues be interested in my research? So just always focus on that so what, and look to really justify the importance of your research and its contributions, as opposed to just that there's a gap in the literature.
Great. Well, look, thank you all very much for your considered advice and for joining us on the panel today. To Professor Serenavolo, I'd like to thank you from the International Journal of Culture, Tourism and Hospitality Research for joining us from Italy today. To Professor Metin Kozak, the Editor-in-Chief of Anatolia, thank you so much for joining us from Turkey. To Professor Stanislav Ivanov, from the editor of the European Journal of Tourism Research, thank you very much for joining us from Bulgaria. To Associate Professor Gabby Walters, my colleague, Associate Editor of Journal of Vacation Marketing. Again, thank you so much for joining us. To Professor Joseph Cheer, as co-editor of Tourism Geographies. Again, thank you so much for joining us from Japan. And of course, to Dimitris, Professor Dimitris Buhalis, from Editor-in-Chief of Tourism Review, for joining us this morning, your time from the UK. It's been wonderful to have participated in the GHTC conference this year. So I wish the rest of the conference, every success on that. I hope that this panel has been able to answer as many of the questions we got. We had over 24 questions. I think we managed about 10 of them during those rounds. Hopefully this has given you some insights. I think the key words to take away from this are be part of that community, put your hand up. I think there's been some very salient advice given, receiving an increasing number of papers from India, which we're very pleased to receive. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. And I look forward to listening to our next keynote speaker. I can see Professor Lee Jolliffe has joined us there. I can see her on screen too. Good morning to you over there. It's great to have been part of this event, and I look forward and would like to thank both the organisers and the editors for joining us today. My name again is Professor Perry Hobson, editor at the Journal of Vacation Marketing at Sunway University in Malaysia. So again, thank you very much for being part of this session. Thank you one and all. Goodbye.
Let's hope we'll be in India next time, right? Because Zoom is...
It is what it is, as they say, and I look forward to that and traveling in person too.
So with Stan, we should be trying to enjoy, I think, a spa and sauna in India.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Incredible India.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hands-on research.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye now.
A very
Thanks
good afternoon to
Thank
everyone.
you.
So we have come to the end of today's workshop, publishing in top-tier tourism and hospitality journals, held at GHTC, Shillong. On behalf of all the participants present here, I extend my gratitude and sincere thanks to Professor Perry Hobson for chairing this session in an excellent flow, as well as making it interactive and enjoyable. We are more than privileged to have you all with us under one platform. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the esteemed editor-in-chiefs and associate editor for sparing their valuable time out of their tight schedule and offering excellent insights and thoughts for today's workshop. Almost all the problem areas for publishing in top-tier tourism and hospitality journals are being addressed today by our participating editors, And we are very hopeful that this workshop will be of great help and will act as a guiding light for budding researchers to achieve their pursuits. Overall, the workshop has been a wonderful learning experience to one and all. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patient learning. Thank you once again.